Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. I am Raben, and I've been at Raben a long time. And an extraordinary joy is to be able to support some of the most compelling leaders in the nation and organizations that care about and are fighting for our, well, I guess there's no better way to say it, but fighting for our lives at these moments. And we are just so honored to have two incredible, extraordinary leaders who will be introduced in a second as part of a series that we have of helping folks around the country make sense of what's going on and get data and advice in response to your concerns and questions about how leaders are thinking about moving forward in these challenging times. We are really honored that Attorney Candace Phoenix at Raven is going to moderate and kick us off. And I will turn it over to her with tremendous thanks to Damon and Amanda and Candace for what's going to be a great conversation. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much for that, Robert. And I'm thrilled to have all of you here today for this discussion, particularly with Amanda and Damon. I know it's an age where we're always constantly trying to figure out the right path forward, and it's not always clear what that is. And so having this discussion today, I think is going to be really helpful to give you all hopefully some insight into how to choose the path on the fork every single day, as we have to do here. I'm really thrilled to be here with these folks, Damon and Amanda. I'm Candace Phoenix. I'm a principal here in the Government Affairs group at Raben. And we will be starting off with about 30 to 40 minutes of questions and discussion between the three of us. But we will have time at the end to take questions from other folks here. Please drop them in the Q&A function on your screen, and I will be able to see them from there. Or if you need to, you can put them in the chat, but we do prefer for them to be in the Q&A side of things. So queue those questions up so that we can have them when the discussion time comes. So to get started, I'm just going to do some brief introductions and then we'll jump into our questions. So we're joined today by Amanda Fernandez, who is the CEO and founder of Latinos for Education, the first Latino founded and led national organization dedicated to developing, placing, and connecting essential Latino leadership in the education sector, while mobilizing Latino voices to promote practices and policies that remove barriers to equitable educational opportunity. Under her leadership, Latinos for Education has raised over $20 million and has grown from a Boston-based nonprofit to a national leader on education policy, advocacy, and leadership development, with a presence from coast to coast. Thank you, Amanda, for joining us. We also have Damon Hewitt, who is the president and executive director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, where he has led the organization's victories on a range of critical issues, including affirmative action, race-conscious programs, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, election protection and voter disinformation. You can see that on the sign behind him there for election protection. Redistricting, fair housing, algorithmic bias, and artificial intelligence, and police accountability. One of the nation's foremost experts in civil rights litigation and policy, Hewitt has more than 20 years of experience, including prior leadership roles in the nonprofit, philanthropic, and public sectors. And my prior claim to fame was that I interned in his office many, many years ago. And I'm really thrilled to be here with him today for this discussion. So thank you both for joining us. So we'll jump in with the first question we have today. In the past year, there's been an unrelenting stream of adverse policy announcements and decisions from the current administration here in DC, rolling back policies meant to protect American civil rights and access to opportunity. And I know Steve Bannon, who's one of the president's advisors, has talked about how one of the administration's strategy is what he called muzzle velocity, basically overwhelming people with the volume of activity, where some people say cruelty is the point, but also chaos is the point. And so I'm curious for you all, how do you deal with triaging all of the news and deciding when to commit time and resources to intervene? And we'll start with Amanda.
Big question. Thank you for having me here today. So, look, when this all happened a year ago, right, when we started getting the barrage of all of the executive orders and just the constant, as Steve Bannon said, which was the intent. And so I think for the first several months, it was just shocking. And it was hard to really do anything. As a nonprofit leader, and by the way, our name is Latinos for Education. You you just actually don't know what to do. And the whole sector was just in um, turmoil, the education sector. Everyone was trying to figure out what to do, what to say. It seems like it was so long ago, and it wasn't. But so I'd say the first several months was really just about trying to gird yourself to say, what is happening here? And what is it that we actually do? And where do we go to get information? Uh, so the first several months was really about that, of just sort of clearing the fog and saying, all right, what do we need to do? And so for us, it's been a very internal exercise of ensuring that we are protecting um, not just our organization, but the very community that we serve. And so there was a lot out there, right? We joined groups of other nonprofits that were trying to navigate these waters, trying to get advice and feedback on what to do. I think, we've seen um, in my colleagues in the sector, a lot of us just went right to things like we have to look at our messaging, we have to look at our websites, we have to look at how we are talking about our work. Um, so we started with that, and over the course of, say, that was in the first few months, and then we then actually were able to get some support from philanthropy, which enabled us to work with you all, the Raben Group, to help us really look at both our internal as well as our external, and really help us to craft a plan for how we should navigate these challenges that were before us, while still every day this barrage of change was continuing to happen. So I can go into detail later, but I'll stop there in terms of first few months. It was like, what is going on? Gird yourself. uh, we were all afraid. Then, okay, we got to get it together. We got to figure out how we support both our community externally as well as our organization, and then get the help we need to help navigate those waters.
I think that's a great description of those first few months. Everyone was just sort of girding for what was coming next and trying to find a path forward. And so, Damon, I know one of the interesting questions that I think a lot of organizations have been faced with is on this question of when to commit resources and how to decide when to let yourself get really pulled into the responsive work versus the affirmative work that your organization sometimes are set up to do. So can you talk a little bit about that, how you decide
Yeah.
when to respond and how to balance the response versus the proactive work?
Yeah. Well, first, just thank you, Candace and Robert Raben and the whole Raben group for this opportunity to be in conversation today, and great to connect with you, Amanda, as well. So I will not profess to have all the answers, all the right answers, but I'll give you kind of take folks inside the cone as to my own thinking, which relates to our team's thinking. For us, it starts with our own framing, our affirmative framing. We can get so caught up in the what you call a responsive, but also just the tactical, right? Because there can be responses that are strategic, but when it's responsive only or reactionary only and only tactical and not thinking about strategy, that's when you really can get kind of sucked in more than you wish for. And so for us, the framing started back in early February of last year. We actually had what we call our annual staff advance. It's not a retreat because we're moving forward, not backwards. So we had our staff advance just maybe a couple of weeks after Inauguration Day. So by that point, executive orders are coming down, and the mayhem that we now know had just kind of begun in earnest. And so our entire staff is looking to me to say, okay, what are we going to do? And of course, we come up with these answers together. But with guidance from our litigation managers and other people on our executive team, we came to something that is very simple, but also very important, which is that our focus is not on everything that happens that's bad and crazy, because the floor for weird is different than it was before. The floor for crazy, we're at peak racism, peak oppression, peak attack, right? So we can't respond to everything. But our focus is on the affirmative results we are trying to drive for the communities that we serve, which are primarily Black people in communities and other communities of color as well. And so we have our, we're not beholden to our institutional structure, but we have litigating units with subject matter expertise. We have policy units with subject matter expertise. And so we're focused in our annual plans, which we develop every year for these units. Here are the results we're trying to drive, and here's how we're going to do it this year. And so when it comes to all of the attacks from this administration and even from states and the private sector, our focus is then on what are the threats, specific threats to the results we're trying to drive. So I know that may sound like overly simplistic, but it actually is a discipline in there because we're not going to just knee-jerk respond to any and everything. I will say that it's important we've learned not to oversubscribe ourselves. So if we spend 100% of our time focused on the things that I just laid out, whatever those issues may be, it doesn't allow us to be nimble for things that do emerge. And I'll give you kind of a couple of examples. One is based upon our very model at the Lawyers Committee, which is leveraging the private bar. In the last decade, we've leveraged over 1 million pro bono hours from law firms all around the country, and even some in-house legal departments at corporations. And so, that obviously becomes a big issue when law firms themselves are under attack, when they're backsliding, capitulating, as some have said, when corporations are doing the same thing. And so we actually find ourselves thinking, well, we didn't set out the year thinking we'd be defending law firms or the private bar, but it's very important that we have a vocal voice. Number one, to help firms, find their stride in their spines in some cases. In other cases, doing things like filing amicus briefs in support of the ones that are fighting back, like your Perkins Coie or General Block, Wilmer Hale, firms of firms of that sort. And so then just general leadership, connecting with retired federal judges. We did an event last year with two former federal judges just to socialize these issues and talk about the potential impact on racial justice pro bono, where we're a strategic home base for lawyers who want to do that. So we had to be nimble to be able to do that. We also had to be nimble to stand in solidarity. So we haven't done much immigration work at all over the years here at the Lawyers Committee, certainly in the last decade, a few matters, but what we have done is stand in solidarity with our sister organizations and communities who have been specifically and directly attacked. For example, with the LA deployment of immigration officers and National Guard, frankly, we stood in solidarity, did a joint press conference that was led by UNIDOS US. And we just did another one just a few weeks ago, just to kind of keep up the drumbeat of solidarity. So just focusing on the results we're trying to drive and the threats there too, and then being nimble enough to know when is there something that is kind of an overarching existential thing, like the attacks on the bar, and then also things where we've got to stand in solidarity with our partners because we want them to stand with us, so we got to stand in solidarity with them.
That's a great response, and you actually anticipated one of my questions about this solidarity piece, about how you manage being disciplined, but also making sure that your partners feel supported if something's outside of your lane. So thank you for that. I do want to follow up on one thing that you said sort of early on in your response of how everyone was looking to you to have an answer. And I'm sure we've got a number of people on this call who are leaders of their organizations who are also dealing with folks looking at them and expecting them to have an answer. And I'm wondering if you could speak to how you handle that pressure, that expectation, both just sort of in terms of managing your own reaction to the situation, but then also how you navigate through that to make sure that you are able to provide a response when there is no right answer.
Yeah. Well, first of all, some of you who know me well know I talk too much, right? So I think I have to practice, stopping, listening, and giving other people a chance to lead because we have an organization full of wonderful leaders, regardless of positional authority in the organization. But people do want a sense of parameters, vision. And so we just actually did some of this, I guess it was last week. We were mapping out the remainder of the year with our managerial core. And I just reminded people about the things that are important to us that are not new. For us, we want to keep the main thing in terms of focusing on the results we're trying to drive. We're going to be a race forward organization. Certainly in my tenure, we've made that a really important facet, kind of really, we've always have been, but kind of getting back to first principles about why this organization was founded over 60 years ago in the first place. And if anybody is going to talk about race, it's going to be us, right? And we have to kind of mainstream that. We also really talked a lot about strategic integration. We don't want to be siloed, right, in our various subject matter expertise. So to balance the expertise. And so what I found is by reminding folks of kind of the basic tenets of how we do our work, people really embrace that. And I found like amazing collaborations across the organization. I will tell you that it any leader of a an issue very important or an organization of a substantial decent size is going to feel a little bit of pressure, but that comes with the territory. And so I'm not going to say I'm like numb to the pressure, but I embrace it. I embrace it as a challenge and an opportunity. But I also know that at the end of the day, if I'm the only one giving answers, we've already lost, right? So I have to like make sure that we can pull the best out of our team, give people some parameters with them to work with, maybe even giving folks, it's almost like if I don't do pottery, but I can imagine you're making clay. I have to give people the clay. I have to give them the spinning wheel. I have to put people in position to do their very best. And we're going to make something beautiful together. Maybe it comes in different pieces. We're going to make something beautiful together over time.
I love that. That in and of itself is beautiful. So thank you for that. Amanda, you mentioned earlier that you would talk a little bit about some of the particular interventions that your organization undertook over the past year as you were triaging and deciding when to lean in. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that you did do once you decided to lean in?
So, certainly happy to talk about that. And again, I think the thing before I get into this to remember is it was still early stage of all of this coming at us as a nonprofit. And um, I'm thinking in hindsight around just even the rollbacks that are already happening, even just what we heard from the Department of Education now not pursuing DEI as recently as I think it was today or yesterday. Um, so it's kind of interesting thinking back of like, look at all the things we did, look at where we are now, and we're still sort of in that place of you don't really know what's going to stick and what isn't. So being tempered is really important. I think that's just a message that I want to get across to everyone. If we're going to be in constant reactive mode, we aren't going to be able to focus on our mission. We're not going to be able to focus on the very people we were set up to serve and support in our work. And so I've had to keep that central to the decisions that we make. I've also had to feel some tension around certain, we are a national organization. Different people want different responses from us. But I've had to stay very centered on our values, very centered on um, our organization being able to exist. And so some of the things very specifically that we did and continue to monitor, we were first part of an external working group with other nonprofits that were just meeting to talk to one another to say, what are you doing? What are some of the things that you're implementing in your organization? How are you protecting yourselves? That then moved to this work that we did specifically with you all at the Raben Group, which was incredibly helpful to have that support to help us really dig into um, all of the ways in which we are communicating and showing up, both again internally and externally. And having that was essential because this has been such an immense distraction from the core of our work, from what we are set up to do, and the community that we are supporting, the Latino community. And so I will tell you, I had moments of real frustration because of having to spend this extra and inordinate amount of time in this sort of defensive posture. But with the help of you all, we did what a lot of organizations have done. We did the audits of our website, of our marketing materials, of our employment policies, and really made sure, also with some attorneys' support, that we um, follow all of the requirements of a 501(c)(3). And just as a baseline, make sure there's no airtight in terms of how we govern and run our organization, and then making some decisions about what we can and can't say and what we should or shouldn't say. I will tell you, it was even on the table, should we keep our name? And that is just real. Any organization that has the word Black or Latino or Asian or, name the group, is probably asking themselves that. We've chosen not to do that. I have decided that if this is the hill we die on, then so be it. But we are here to be in service of community, to uphold the values of our community, to see our community as an asset to this country, because that is what we are, and continue to ensure that our students are getting the educators, the leaders that they deserve in their classrooms, that our families feel well supported in their schools. That is what matters, and that is what we continue to focus on. So I will say, uh, the sort of the last big thing that we did was we set up an internal working group across all of our functions to keep track of what are the funders saying, our development team, um, who's talking to our legal counsels, people in our, human resources and operations, our marketing and communications team, of course, our policy people, so that we would be able to keep track of all of these mandates coming down, and make sure that we knew and were on top of anything that more directly impacted our work and our community. So we've put in all of these mechanisms. And I think, and so I think what's interesting, again, a year later, is I think we've gotten so used to the barrage of the distractions and the um, very challenging country that we are in right now, that being able to just focus on our work and do our work has kept us, I think, grounded and operating with our values first, because all of that affects us all, with our mental health. Um, we're Latinos for education, so many people in our community are impacted by these decisions and these policies. So our work is really now centered on continuing to think about how we best serve Latino students in this country and to stay the course. And I'm very proud of that, because it's been such a challenging journey. And of course, we continue to deal with the impacts, and we also have to take care of our own community, of our staff, of finding spaces for our community to be able to speak freely and to have conversations and to get support and the help that they need.
It's wonderful, Amanda. And if you could speak a little bit more about how you decided when to modulate message or mission in response to this administration and what was happening. I mean, I think that we've seen people across all sorts of industries trying to de-risk. And sometimes that de-risking means retreating entirely from the arena. And sometimes it means making sort of case by case calls like the one you described in terms of keeping your organization's name. So what were some of the things that you would think about as factors when you were deciding whether or not to make changes in response to what was happening?
Well, so what's really challenging about this is we have funders that support our work, right? We are philanthropically supported. We have a board. So I don't just get to make decisions just based on what I want to do or what my team wants to do. There's all of these stakeholders that um, you have to consider. And a few things have been happening in the sector. There are many nonprofits that are folding or have folded already. Funding is not what it used to be. There's a reluctance across philanthropy to stand up for, and they're getting their own legal counsel about what to fund and what not to fund. We have had corporate sponsors say, we no longer can support you because our company has taken a stance, and we will not be able to work with an organization that has Latino in their name. So this is what you balance. We're fighting for survival, literally. So we have to make decisions that are based on whether we can survive with the funding that we need. So we can say all we want about we should stand out and be out there and advocating and saying you being responsive externally all the time. I can, but I have to balance that with, yeah, but what if we don't exist anymore? Like this is very real. I have heard from other funders as well that some of their grantees are um, on their last months of reserves of funding. So it's very real that organizations are dissolving during this administration and because of this administration's policies. So it is very real as a leader. Um, all of the different stakeholders, and it's not just a decision you can make in isolation at all. So that has been a big factor in decisions that we make about what we speak about and what we don't.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's really easy to point to some entities and say, well, why did you fold? And I think there's some that are very well resourced, and we're sort of expecting them to be the front line and to hold the line so that the organizations who are not as well resourced can make some different decisions, like the ones that you're talking about here. So thank you for everything that you've gone through to make sure that your organization stays open. And I don't know if you saw before when you were talking about the importance of keeping the name Latinos for Education, there were just a number of hearts that were coming out of the chat and the Q&A. So I know it's been that was a meaningful decision for at least some people in our audience here. So thank you for that.
Right. Well, my heart goes back to those folks. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. It's a journey. I see the heart now.
Mhm.
I love
Yes.
that. All right. Thank you.
And Damon, I saw you came off mute. Did you want to weigh in on that?
Well, I just want to appreciate Amanda for her candor. I mean, it takes a lot of strength to be, let's call it vulnerable in this open space, open channel. But this is what leaders are doing for each other right now. And so your sharing is just such a gift, for sure. And the thing is, and I think we have to be in a judgment-free zone, right? You know, even the law firms that said we use the word capitulation, we don't call law firms out. We're calling them in because number one, I'm not letting any firm off the hook for doing racial justice pro bono. We're not going to sever any ties. And we found such amazing champions who have stood with us on some of the leading edge litigation that some people may think they don't want to touch. But also the other thing is that there's another part of kind of a corollary to survival, which is that you don't, we don't, Amanda didn't say we're in survival for the rest of our institutional lives. It's almost like a period of time. And I'm not making this all about Trump because I think that some of the negative things that we're experiencing certainly existed before, they will exist afterwards. But we are at a period of peak racism and peak weaponization. And so things can change and shift, not just when someone leaves office, but things can change and shift even right now. So, for example, some of the firms would say, they've told me, well, we can't do anything like this right now. They said that last year, but maybe things will soften a bit in a few months. So, for example, the appeals are coming up in the cases where the law firms are fighting back. The law firms who had executive orders issued against them. If and as they continue to win, or maybe as those matters come to resolution, maybe other firms feel a little bit safer. Maybe, not necessarily. But my point is that there's not a permanence there. I do want to note, too, that for organizations who don't have in-house legal support or civil rights expertise, I just want to let everyone know that the Lawyers Committee, we've stood up over the last 2 years an effort that we call our Protecting and Advancing Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiative, or PADEI for short. And through this initiative, which is resourced by philanthropies, uh, we are advising smaller nonprofits, scholarship programs, pipeline programs, groups that want to get more Black girls into the medical professions, some CDFIs. 8% of the intakes have been CDFIs. So it's been over 200 organizations that have come to us for advice. And we give attorney-client privileged custom advice to these clients. And knock on wood, fingers crossed, all of that. To date, no one's been challenged in a legal proceeding or regulatory proceeding. And our whole ambition is to help organizations manage potential risk and liability, but also don't ever let go of the possibility of advancing your race conscious mission. We know things are a matter of degree these days and a matter of perspective. So we want to see these kind of race targeted missions continue and the work continue, including for groups that have Latino, Black, what have you, in their name, because we don't want organizations to have to make the very difficult decision to suspend operations or to kind of neuter their own programs. And we also, I should mention, are litigating these issues in the courts. We're challenging the anti-DEI executive orders in courts, and there's a case where we are currently prevailing with our clients alongside our co-counsel at Latino Justice, alongside our co-counsel at National Women's Law Center and the Chicago Lawyers Committee, and a great law firm, Crowe and Moore. We're litigating this issue, and we have kind of a layer of injunctive relief. Part of the injunctive relief is nationwide, certainly as of right now, that protects our clients, Chicago Women in Trades, from having their grant terminated by the Department of Labor. But there's also a nationwide component that provides that no grantee or contractor for Department of Labor anywhere in the country may be forced to certify that they don't do quote unquote illegal DEI. And that's the kind of provision that has a real chilling effect, not just on grantees and contractors, but on their potential partners. It basically is designed to show your operation and to force conduct. And so at any rate, we're doing bespoke advisory on this work. Happy to talk to people about that and connect them to our staff, but also we're litigating too. We're winning so far. We intend to keep winning.
Amazing. I wish I could stop there because that was a great message, but we have more time, so and more conversation to have. I will say, Damon, you're already proving yourself a wonderful rhetorical speaker because I've already jotted down. We're doing a staff advance, not a staff retreat. I jotted down we're calling them in, not calling them out. But I want to talk more about that calling them in versus calling them out piece. I know that there is often a debate for folks about when to speak out publicly versus when to have behind the scenes conversations, both with targets of the administration,
Yeah.
like law firms, and with the administration itself or
Mhm.
members of Congress. How do you evaluate when to speak out publicly and when to work behind the scenes, or maybe when to do both?
Yeah, almost everything we do is public to varying degrees. I'm going to give you another rhetorical flourish. We talk about the story we tell about our work, the story we sell, who was doing like the fundraising, and the impact we make. So I don't want to have great work sitting on the shelf and not talk about it. Because as an executive director, that is, a large part of my role to frame for strategy purposes and external relations purposes. I will say there's some things like when it came to the initial work around law firms, I had lots and lots of quiet calls, quiet coffees, quiet lunches with all the managing partner types that you could imagine, the people who've been in the news lately included. We didn't want to call folks out because we didn't see a future in that, right? Like, is that going to make them change course? No. Is it going to make them want to work with us more? No. And so there was a lot of behind the scenes. We even work with our Lawyers Committee affiliates around the country. There are 8 affiliates in places like Chicago, Philly, Jackson, Mississippi, Boston, what have you, and here in Washington, D.C. too. We in California, we actually sent some quiet communication to all of the AmLaw 100 law firms. So we did some behind the scenes there to say, look, keep standing with us, keep staying with us, right? But just on our general work, uh, I will say we too did a review of our, website and our materials, just to refresh ourselves on what we were talking about. We didn't start with the presumption that we needed to change anything. We just wanted to focus on, what is it we're saying? And so, only a fool is their own lawyer, as they say. So we did have outside, counsel as well. And I'll just be frank, outside counsel said, hey, you have language about diversity. You may want to change that. And we said, oh no, we're not changing that, right? We're gonna keep that. Um, we want to, look at things that may be defamation risk or things of that sort. So I would say everything these days is about risk tolerance. Like the message I give, I won't mention the name because she may not want to be named, but a friend of mine who's a partner at a major, MLaw 50, probably actually AmLaw 2 or 3 law firm. I shouldn't say all that, but I've we've been on panels together, and I've heard the advice she gives, and we like talk about whether it's your public uh, brand identity, things are on their website, or your programs or how you advertise them. We talk about everything's about how you analyze risk these days, whether it's a nonprofit client or a corporate client or entity. And so I decouple. Like there's people talking about litigation risk like it's one thing. I say we have to decouple. The risk of being challenged or sued is actually very high right now because of the environment. Your risk of being found liable for a violation of the law may not be as great. And so when you think about it decoupled in that way, it's basically a gut check. And it's going to be a little different for every nonprofit. It's going to be a little different for every organization because of your existing relationships. I know orgs who have been pressured by their funders. I know orgs who have had, corporations walk away from them. And you have to make some tough decisions based on that. But so I guess it's all about the unique risk calculus based upon what you're trying to preserve, what you're willing to risk, what you're willing to let go of. So I wish that Amanda and I could give you all a kind of like a secret formula, but there isn't one. It's really going to be unique. The important thing is to do like you have to kind of as a leader. This is a time when every leader and every organization has to figure out who you're going to be, right? In this moment. And so, well, again, in a judgment-free zone, that means not just deciding for yourself, but that means also eyeballing this with your leadership team, eyeballing this with your board, figuring out if we take X risk, who's really with us? If we take X risk, who are we going to lose, or what do we stand to lose? But also, what do we stand to gain if we take no risk at all? So it's always going to be a gut check, a subjective standard, but all based upon what you think the risk and the reward is. Maybe that's the most important thing, Candace. It's not just analyzing risk and kind of stuck in deficit. It's also potential reward or your pros and cons. If we only think about the cons and we don't think about the pros of action or inaction, then we're missing half the picture and half the analysis.
Wonderful, Damon. And I think that reminds me of a conversation that I've had with some other folks in this space about grounding, about what the purpose of your organization is. And there are some organizations who might be, for example, a domestic violence organization that is wanting to serve diverse communities and is worried about having LGBTQ friendly language on their website. And their whole mission is to make sure that domestic violence victims have a place to escape to. So maybe for them, having certain language be at the forefront is not as important as doing the work quietly and making sure your doors stay open, versus some organizations whose entire purpose is to fight and litigate for civil rights. Maybe you're one of the organizations that should sort of have your chin out front and be one of the ones leading at the forefront, or saying, as you did, Damon, no, we're not taking that off the website. Like that's part of who we are. That's part of our raison d'etre. And so analyzing like what your organization's core mission and core goals are, I think is really important. I do want to flag the time. So for folks who are listening, we're going to ask one, maybe two more questions, and then turn to Q&A. So there's a Q&A function. I just want to remind you in the Zoom. I see some questions are already coming in, so we'll turn to those in a few minutes. But wanted to give you a chance now to know that we're going to be starting to ask questions in a few minutes. If you have one, please feel free to add it there. But I think our last question for this round, I want to ask each of you, what gives you hope? I know a lot of times early on people would ask me, is it legal for him to do that? And I would say, well, that's not really the question. The question is who's going to stop him from doing that, even if it isn't legal. And I know a lot of people have been disenchanted by some of the decisions coming out of the Supreme Court. In terms of some of the things that have been happening with this administration, and are looking for places to find hope. So, what is it that keeps each of you going and keeps you seeing light at the end of the tunnel? And we'll start with Amanda.
So I was thinking about your point here, Damon, about the pros and cons and ways you can look at what's happening and risk reward. What I have been thinking about and what gives me hope is this isn't going to go on forever. There's going to be an aftermath, which isn't positive. But what is positive, at least from the vantage point that I have working in the education sector, and it's where I'm leading my organization, is what is our role in helping to rebuild this education system in America? Because it wasn't working for about 50% of kids in this country. So, what can we do now? How do we take this opportunity where literally the house has been burned down and you have to build a new one? And what will our role be? And so, we're looking beyond the everyday to say, how do we make it so that now in this country, with 1/3 of all school children being Latino, do we make sure that when we are looking to the future of what education can be in this country, and as we will all be responsible for building this country back to, or not back, but to a new nation that actually can serve all people? That is what gives me hope because there's a lot of people thinking about that. There's a lot of people who are saying, how do we make this moment such that we change the systems that never worked for our communities of color in particular? So that is what gives me hope, and that's what keeps me anchored. It's how I orient, is how I think anyway. So it's about, look, like we've got to be now just as we should have been doing during COVID, but now is the moment to say, okay, this is happening now and we have to deal with that, but we also have to look toward the future to say what should we be planting the seeds for now? What is the foundation we should be laying for what we want to be better in this country?
That's fantastic. I mean, your analogy of that house having burned down, you have to build it back up again. Why do you have to use the same blueprint? You can draw a new one. So I love that. Damon, what about you? What gives you hope in this moment?
Well, first, Amanda, that's just beautiful, inspiring. Really consistent with what Amanda said. We've been talking over the last year or so at the Lawyers Committee about fighting back and fighting forward. And so it's maybe a more modest way of stating it than what Amanda said, but it's really the need to balance our portfolios to have some affirmative work, not just the quote unquote reactive work. Uh, and the ideas that we can build, I'm inspired, may sound cliche, but by our ancestors who, fought and won without the tools we have. We know our tools are under attack. Voter Rights Act, even Title VI of the Civil Rights Act are being weaponized against efforts to provide opportunity and inclusion for our communities who have been locked out of opportunity by law and by fact for so long. But there was a time, when we didn't have the laws that we have now, the kind of civil rights era statutory frameworks. When Brown v. Board was litigated, the law of the land was Plessy v. Ferguson, and before there was a Civil War and a Reconstruction Amendments, a 14th Amendment, there were people who were abolitionists who were fighting, chattel slavery. So our peoples, all of us come from a long tradition. Our country comes from a long tradition of not just resistance, but of like dreaming a future better than the one that we currently exist. We are our ancestors' wildest dreams. Will our descendants be our wildest dreams? And what conditions do we have to put in place? I often, when I talk about what motivates me, what inspires me, I often talk about being in Selma, Alabama, as many of us will be in just a couple of weeks for the annual Jubilee, commemorating Bloody Sunday, but also the fortitude of the folks, the foot soldiers for justice who crossed that bridge, whether they were beaten or not. And when a few years ago we were marching across the bridge, I think it was one of the years when President Biden was there, and it just struck me to how steep the bridge is, physically steep. And so when you're at the base, the foot of the bridge, as you're walking up, you can't literally see what's on the other side until you get to the apex. Like you don't know, right? But then I thought about a metaphor, like our, ancestors, the foot soldiers who crossed on Bloody Sunday, they didn't literally see what was on the other side themselves, but they had every reason to think that they would be beaten, that they could be killed, that they would lose. They were fighting for a Voting Rights Act that did not exist, right? So if they continue to march, why can't we? We have to have a bit of faith to believe that there's something better on the other side, or that we can endure at least what's on the other side, even if we can't see it all and touch it all right now. But we have a duty to those who come behind us, because we can't just rest on the shoulders of the people who came before us. We've got to create a path for others as well.
You have me jotting down more things that you said during that conversation, including the fighting back versus fighting forward. I think I'm going to declare you the Ted Lasso of the civil rights organizations these days. Thank you both for that. I'm going to look at some of the questions now from our audience here. One of the questions I think is for you, Damon, when we were talking earlier about how to balance discipline of what you're actually working on and have capacity for, with the need to stand in solidarity with partners who may not be quite in that line of discipline that you're focusing on. Someone asked, if you could describe in more detail what it looks like to stand in solidarity with folks, particularly when you're not, you've decided it's not the core mission that you're working on.
Sure. It could be, like I mentioned, when Unidos said, hey, we're deeply concerned about LA. There were people who were going to LA, standing in solidarity, Black, brown, all kinds of folks. And that's not something that we did, not because it's not important, but because honestly, I didn't feel like we were adding significant value, and we weren't ready and had capacity to take on legal representation or direct advocacy. But when it came to doing the press conference that Janet Murguia asked us to do a couple of times, when it came to signing on to statements that are led by our umbrella coalition, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, led by Maya Wiley, those are easy choices. And frankly, because they did not require significant expenditure of human capital or time and resources, it was lending our reputational capital, which is valuable. But we were able to do that. So it was not quite a heavy lift. There are also other things that we maybe did not sign on to. And I'll just be blunt. I'm not opposed to the effort, but we haven't jumped out into the impeach Kristi Noem effort. There are great people who are leading those kinds of efforts. And I'm not saying that we would never consider that, but it's just you can't, like, as an organization, you can't have your name on everything, because then you dilute what your message actually is. But also we want to do it with a degree of intentionality and know what we're walking in and getting into and be ready to see it through. I think that's the thing. What is the end game? So those are, I guess, hopefully helpful, some examples of things that we have jumped into, things that we've stood in solidarity on, and things that maybe, we haven't quite as much. But definitely deep respect and admiration for the fights. It takes I'm not going to give you another metaphor. I'll stop, because you'll
I'll write that one down too.
Yeah.
And I think for folks who are dealing with this question for themselves, I think it can be helpful to identify like a decision matrix for yourself to
Yeah.
decide what your core mission and core goals are
Right.
as a preliminary matter, and then have a decision matrix that says, like, is it one of our core missions or not? Is it a coalition partner or not? Is it a community that we need support for or not? How much does it cost us to do that? What is the output that we need to have? What are the possible ramifications of that? If you sit down and decide what are the questions that you would need to answer beforehand, and literally have a decision matrix that leads to yes or no, that can help you really decide especially when you have a lot of stuff coming in, what you want to weigh in on and what you don't have capacity for. So that's one thing I'd recommend for folks who are asking themselves that question
Yeah.
of how to stand in
Right.
solidarity. We have one question for Amanda as well. For our conversation earlier, you described how you were identifying what, quote, hills you would die on. And one of the questions that came in is, how did you communicate the decisions that came out of that discussion internally to staff? And how did you handle responses from staff if any staff were displeased with some of the decisions that were made?
Thank you for the question. So we had an internal process. And so the working group that I mentioned earlier uh, was part of decision making, would contribute their opinions from all the different perspectives that I had mentioned earlier. And then we have an executive leadership team, and so discussions had there around those hills to die on. And I'd say keeping our name was an important one. Um, so then it's about the transparency that we have with our staff. Again, the good news in terms of how we operate as an organization is with that level of as much transparency as possible with our team about what's happening and decisions that we are making and doing that in real time. So really, it was just about the transparent communication to staff about certain decisions that we had made, certain recommendations that had come from Raben on different policies or different actions we would take internally or externally or not. So really bringing our team along because during this moment of so much uncertainty where folks need to feel like there's their organization is one that they can turn to where there's trust that's been built. That's really essential during times like this so that they not only expect the transparency, but it's part of who we are and how we operate. As you can hear by just how candid I am, I don't really know another way to be. So it's just important for me to bring people along the journey. It helps our folks to feel more secure in terms of what's happening right now and having that grounding place to be at and come to work at every day.
Wonderful. One additional question we have, Damon, you mentioned earlier lawyerscommittee.org/PADI, which is for protecting and advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion as a resource for some pro bono counsel. Are there other resources that either of you are aware of that either you have used or you've recommended to others for how to help navigate these kinds of questions that folks are dealing with in this time?
Sure. There's I guess you call it informal network of nonprofit orgs that are less focused on like kind of the race conscious pieces like that, like your name and what have you, but just the general attacks on nonprofits that are mission driven. So this, I guess, I'm not sure what we can share, but what I would say is anyone who's interested should reach out and I can help connect you because it's kind of a behind the scenes network, I would say, that isn't like a formal thing, isn't run by one organization, but there's some very well known and trusted people. And I would put it this way when you see folks testifying on the Hill as what's essentially the minority witness um, on any type of hearing that's alleging that nonprofits are weaponized against conservative agenda, then there's a group of people who comes together to brainstorm about, okay, what's the right messaging around this? What kind of things do the members of Congress on this committee need to know ahead of time, especially the friendlies? So there's intentionality behind everything. Things don't just happen, not in DC. There's intentionality behind all of it, and so I'm happy to help people connect to that kind of network. Um, I'll stop with that for now. Yeah.
Amanda, are there resources? I mean, you mentioned earlier your work with Raven, and we're always happy to help folks who want that sort of guidance. But are there other resources that you've identified or seen that have been helpful in this moment?
I mean, the one that stands out to me is the National Council of
Yeah,
Nonprofits. They
yeah.
do have convenings around how to, navigate these times. So that's what I would point to off the top of my head.
Yeah, definitely shout out to Diane Yantel and her team there and the membership, and also Democracy Forward. I don't know the formal mechanism, but they've been
Yeah,
definitely providing some of that support as
agreed.
well. Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, those would be a couple.
Mhm.
Wonderful. And I think, Damon, even as you were talking, you identified another way in which that it looks to stand in solidarity to answer someone else's question earlier. I know when there have been hearings attacking nonprofits, you all and other organizations have been really great about literally showing up in the room to provide
Mhm.
that support, literally standing in solidarity with the
Mhm.
folks who are under attack there. So that's another great example there. So I'm noticing the clock now, and I think we're just about out of time, but I want to thank you both for your insights and your being so candid and sharing today. I know these are really difficult and sometimes heartrending decisions that people are making. They're stressful, and to hear from other people, as Damon mentioned earlier, just knowing that this the conversation is happening, knowing that others are dealing with this, I think can be helpful. And providing the insight that you all did today is just invaluable to a number of folks who are facing these challenges right now. I want to make sure that everyone knows how to get in contact with us if you're interested in any assistance in reaching some of the resources that either Damon or Amanda talked about or in services from Raben. You can email us at info@raben.co. Of course, visit our website at raben.co or follow us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. This recording will be shared after the panel and uploaded loaded to Raven's YouTube channel. So if you know other folks who wanted to see this and couldn't, please feel free to share it with them because I think there was a lot of great insights that we had today from both Damon and Amanda. So with that, I just want to thank you all for your time here. Thank Damon and Amanda for their insight and wish you all the best. We are 1 year in. We still have a couple more years to go, but I think there are a lot of people who didn't think we could survive this first year, and we have, and we can survive the remaining time too. So, any
Great.
last words, Amanda or Damon?
Just thank you for having us and appreciate the opportunity and wishing everyone the best out there.
Ditto that. Together we can.
Perfect place to end. Thank you all so much.